Okay, first things first. We're going to go here and move this. We're going to go here to new file, or we could go file, new file. Illustrator has a lot of templates up here. So if I go to print, view all presets, I can go to tabloid. And then over here, I can put it in portrait or landscape. I can change this to inches. I know what my inch size is, so on and so forth. And then I don't know why it has raster effects is saying it'll be at 300. That's not important for us right now. And we will get this. Okay, does that make sense? So
Yes.
Look at here. And if you guys have been in Photoshop, there's some things that overlap. One of them is this, the layers window, or the layers palette. By the way, all your palettes live under Windows. And by the way, you don't have to remember everything I'm saying right now. I'll edit this video after we're done and I'll put it up, okay? So just like Photoshop, I can go here, I can make a layer, I can drag it into the trash can, and these other things we'll get into later. But that part of it works just like Photoshop. We've got swatches. This whole thing I can set up however I want to do it. So if I come over here to Windows and I go, I'm trying to find a thing I don't have on here. Let's go color guide. I can take it, and you can see this little well right here. I can take this and I can drag it into here. Then I can arrange these however I want. I like to have layers and then my swatches and my color stuff right here. And then what happens after you do that, then when you really get that nailed down how you like it, you can go up here to workspace, new workspace, name it and hit OK, and it will give you your personal workspace where when you start getting too many things getting sloppy, you can just go back to, like, I can go, I think I have one here. Yeah, I do. So if I have this and I start getting all these stuff out here and I start getting sloppy, I can go via Windows, workspace. I should have reset mic, and it puts it all back all nice and neat. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
We want to work smart. Like I used to work, like I can just click these. By the way, if you notice there's more of them on here, I can separate those. I could pull this out, put it in here on its own. Don't need appearance. You know, and I slide this up here. So I can set that up however I want. I would wait a little bit before I set up the workspace, just because, you know, you got to get used to what tools you like using. You can also delete them. You know, manage workspaces, you can delete it, start a new one and all that, okay? Now, over here, we got our black arrow tool and our white arrow tool. What that means is if I make a shape, if I go to my black arrow tool and I grab this shape, what it's going to do is just move it around, okay? If I go to my white arrow tool and I click on it, I can manipulate all these shapes. I can manipulate the handles and the various tools that I can play with on that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So just make sure you know if you grab that black arrow tool, it's just gonna move the whole thing. Okay, I'm only gonna go through a few here. We're gonna talk about this one in a minute. I'm gonna go through the ones that I think are relevant right now. This is your type tool. So if I just grab that and I click on something, it'll give me ipsum, lorem ipsum, which is just a Greek type. So if I go and I pull a text block, it'll just give me something that sort of looks like a paragraph, okay? But let's grab this. I'm gonna go shift and hold it. And if I click this, then I go here, or I can go over here to my window for character, and I can pick different typefaces, okay? And also in this one, and some of them are up here, I can kern it, let it, all that kind of stuff. Here I can make it bigger or smaller. This is for letting, this is for kerning. Kerning is going this way, letting is going this way. And you have all your tools in there. So, but what you got to remember is all your palettes are under Windows. Just remember that. Okay, so whenever you need a more complex set of tools for the particular tool you're on, you go to Windows and open up the palette, or if you already have them over here in your well, that'll work too. Let's get rid of this. And by the way, up here you have a control bar, which is sort of like an abbreviated version of your palettes. Okay, so if you notice, if I pick a different tool, that's weird. It should be changing. Put this in. Like that. It changed there. If I go to this, it changed. So it changes. It gives me like a lot of the standard things I might need in that control bar. Most of the time, it's pretty accurate. It's what I do need. Okay, but if you need more, you go to your palettes. Okay. By the way, on this square, and by the way, you don't have to remember everything I'm overviewing. We're going to do all these things, so don't think you got to remember everything I'm doing right now. These little buttons right here, I can pull these in, and that will soften the edge on this. Okay. And then you have various shapes in here: polygon, star. Okay. Now, any of these, if I click on the surface, like on the pasteboard or whatever, the work surface, right here will give me parameters. So I could go and up how many points I have in this. Okay. I could take my white arrow tool and start to manipulate it, so on and so forth. That makes sense, you guys?
Yes.
One more time, how do you manipulate the object?
You just pick the tool and click on the artboard.
Okay, okay.
And then it will just
I thought it was an extra step. Sorry.
Yeah, and like if you go here, it gives me this, which is really just the size. So it just depends. The complexity of what it's going to give you to dial it in depends on the tool itself, or the, you know, what it's trying to make. This is a very simple thing. It's not going to give you all that many, you know, options just because there aren't really any to be had. Okay. This is a paintbrush tool, self-explanatory. Now, what you got to notice here in the difference between this and Photoshop, this is a vector object. You can see this line here. So that means that I can take that and manipulate it. Okay. Or Photoshop, it's going to be just a raster object, and I can't do any of those things with it. We don't care about that yet.
So I have a quick question. So since Illustrator is all vector-based, that means the shape and everything will be all in vector-based as well, right?
Everything's vector.
Okay.
It's a vector program, right? The difference being, I think we talked about this yesterday. Raster has a limit. Vector doesn't have a limit. It doesn't have, it's not independent, or it's resolution independent. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Which is, you know, comes in really handy. Okay, so let's go. Eraser tool, self-explanatory for now. Scissors tool, you can cut paths with that. Rotate tool, so if I have something here, I can grab my rotate tool. But if you notice right here, it has an anchor. So I can put that anchor somewhere and rotate it around a different point. Okay. So that's the difference between that and just making a thing like this. And if you notice, I can go right here on that corner and I'll get that little arrow and I can do this, but I can't change the anchor point. Okay. So that's the difference between the rotating it that way and rotating it the other way. Reflect tool. I can take this object, grab my reflect tool. Now I can place the anchor here. Let's place it here. And then I'm going to hold Option, which if you notice gives me the two arrows, which means it'll copy. And it will just make a reflection of the object. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We'll get into all these tools in much more detail. Now here, this is the scale tool, which is if I had an object, I could go to the scale tool, double click it, and I can get this, and I could change it, the scale here. So if I know I want it to be 22%, I can just dial it in exactly. Now, another thing you gotta always do when you're doing this, especially for what we're gonna do today, right here where it says, always when you first get into Illustrator, I think it stays that way once you set it, but when you first get into it, go to your scale tool right here, double click it, and make sure scale, strokes, and effects is on. Okay, does that make sense?
Can you do
Yes.
that again, please?
When you go into your Illustrator and start this project we're going to start today, go into that tool and make sure scale, effects, and strokes is checked.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Otherwise, what'll happen is if you have a fat line, or let's say, and I shrink it down to smaller, it'll just stay the same fatness, and it doesn't make any sense. It won't scale down proportionally with itself. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And it's just, you know, right here, the little scale tool, double click it. It'll come up, just make sure this is checked. Probably scale corners too. But that's just a scale thing. Here's the shear tool, which again, I can place an anchor point, and then I can bend it around that anchor point, wherever I put it. Not sure about that. This one we're going to talk about in a minute. This one's kind of a weird tool that I'll probably talk about later. Perspective we'll talk about later. This is your, what do you call it? Gradient tool. So if you go up here to your swatches, which by the way, if it's not there, you can go here down to swatches right there. And if you notice right here, there's a gradient. So I'm going to fill that with a gradient. And then I can take this gradient tool. I want to change the direction. And I could change this. Let's change this to something more interesting. And then let's change this to. And also right here, I can make this fade out to nothing if I want. Oops, let's get rid of that line. And you'll just get a nice gradient, okay? Eyedropper tool just samples colors. So let's go pick a solid color. And if I grab my eyedropper tool, well, let's switch it. Let's get a couple of them. By the way, if you hold Option, you see that double, you'll see a double arrow there. In most things, in a lot of programs, this works the same way, where you have, if you hold Option and drag it, you'll get a duplicate. So if I go here to my eyedropper, grab that, you see it switches over here to the active swatch. Okay, so just eyedropper tool. Again, if you've been in Photoshop, it's pretty similar. This is a blend tool. We'll get into that later. We'll get into that later. This is your zoom. Just click and hold it and pull it in or out. And then your hand tool, but you can just hit the space bar to get the hand tool. Okay, you don't have to go to that tool, just hit the space bar. Okay, now here is your fill and your line. So you can see it's filled with this color. So if I change it, it'll be that. And then if and here's something else, like I can click on this and pull it forward. For some reason, there's a little bug in here, and sometimes you'll click it quite a few times and it doesn't work. So I usually just use X. You can just hit X by itself and it'll flip it. So now I'm going to assign a color for the line. There it is. And if you look up here in my control bar under stroke, I can make this, I can do a bunch of things with it, but that's one thing I can do up here. Okay, so this, it looks like the Photoshop foreground background swatch. It's actually line and fill. So if I wanted to make this not full, then I pull this back forward and hit this little, you know, slash, and it wouldn't be, or vice versa. Pull this forward, and we have that. Does that make sense, you guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Pretty simple. The one thing I like about Illustrator is it's fairly straightforward. Okay. What else should we talk about before I get started? Okay, so control bar, toolbar, your well here with all your tools, your palettes in it, your control bar, okay? A lot of what you're gonna do, you'll be able to do just out of your control bar. It actually works pretty good. So here's what we're gonna do. What we're gonna start today is talking about just line and manipulation of line, okay? Then we're gonna do that as an exercise. Then I'm gonna show you how to take it to a render with full color or with color, okay? So right here is your pen tool, okay? Here's the thing with the pen tool. If I'm gonna do a curve, okay, if I'm gonna do a straight, that's pretty simple. I just held the shift key so it constrained it. Let's give this a, and by the way, if you notice it hangs on like that, you can hit return and it'll let go. So I don't want it to have a fill. I want it to have, and let's go to black. I want it to have a black line. And then I'm gonna go up here and make it a little fatter. Okay. So if I want to just make straight lines, you can do that, okay? But when you want to start doing curved lines, here's the trick to it. You put an anchor down, and then you have to start learning, you'll get this intuitively. Then you go over here and you grab the curve, okay? And I can go, let's say here. So you have to sort of anticipate the curve, okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so just know that, because what people do is they come in here and they grab it and then they try and make a curve by like just drawing it. And it's like, you have to go start somewhere. And then, and then make it, okay? It takes a little bit of practice, but you guys will get good at it really fast. Everybody always does. Okay, so let's go. So let's look at this. Let's make a line. And this is one of my favorite things about Illustrator is how great it manipulates line. Let's make it a little funkier. Okay, so you guys can see how I have these kinks in it. You see that? Right here?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
Yes. Oh, sorry. I was saying yes.
Okay, so this is a tool I love in here, by the way. To fix that, I can select it, and then I go here. I think it's under my paintbrush. No, it's not. I got to set up. Here it is. It's under, in this case, it's with this. It usually is with your pencil tool, which is here. You want to go to your smooth tool, and then I can take this tool. And it will automatically smooth out the kinks in that line for me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Which is one of the greatest things in the world, by the way. Let's do a more elegant looking line. So I smooth it out. And now I'm going to go pick this. I'm going to go to this right here, which is my width tool. Okay. And what that does, which I also love, I can grab a point. I don't have to grab a point, but I'm going to grab a point. And now I can get a nice thin, thick line. I'm going to go to this end point here. I want this to be real sharp. And I can get this really nice, thin, thick line. Make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if you guys, there's different things you'll see now. When you see something that's inked like perfectly, like coloring books and things like that, where it's like a very simple image, but it's inked like really perfectly, it's Illustrator. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
I love that because I'm a line freak. I love line. So to me, it's like a big deal. Now, if I go and I want to manipulate this now and go, well, I want it to be a little thinner here, then I need to go back to certain point, like a point. Okay, like right there. So let's go back to here. And there, see that point? So I'm going to try and get closer to this. Right there. It gave, see how it gave me those two handles? And now I can re-manipulate it. That make sense?
Yes.
If I go back randomly, here's what'll happen. It'll pinch. It'll do that. Okay. So I need to float back over an actual anchor point. In this case, it's got to give me those handles. Let's see if this one does. See, that one doesn't, probably because I didn't make it with the width tool. This is what I made with the width tool. So that's
Is
how
it
I go
because
back
it's
and
making-
re-manipulate it, huh?
Is it because it's making that part of it thicker? So if you wanted like a thin part in the middle,
No,
you
it's just
can
making
do
it that way because that's where I put the anchor point. So it's going back to manipulate the same. If I don't do that, then I've got a thin, thick line, and then I start creating another thick or thin thing, and it's just going to pinch it because it's going, oh, you're putting another anchor here. Okay, so we're pinching this now. We're not doing the overall line anymore. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So it's just, if you think about it, it almost can't operate in the other way because it's got, if I go here and I'm telling it, and by the way, you might want to do that. You might want to have something like that happen. Okay. I don't know. Let me see something. Yeah, if I smooth it out, that one, but usually it'll sort of pinch it, which isn't, you know, good. So you just have to go back to one of your original anchor points. I don't know if I have them. Yeah, here it is. But now if I do that, now I've got this one here and it really pinches it. Okay. So you just have to go back to your original anchor point. That's all it means. Okay. Now, here's what we're going to do. Okay, the image I'm going to use for this is not because I like Pokemon, because I don't. Okay. The reason I'm using it is it had the right amount of simplicity, but it wasn't too simple. And it's also a deadline drawing, which means it doesn't have any line quality to it. Does that make sense?
Oh, I see. Yes.
Hmm?
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Because I don't want to, you know, where is it? I put it on my desk. Yeah, I already put it on my desktop. Hang on. Probably did it. So there's two ways I can put this in here. I can either go up here to File, Place, which is fine. Then it'll give me, you know, the browse box, which I'm not going to do right now. Or I can just take it and drag it in. I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. Now, if you can see, it's bigger than the art board, the working section there. So what I'm going to do, and this is kind of a weird thing, the way they do this, I have to click off of everything. So I'm not clicked on anything, and go up here to Document Setup, Edit Artboards, and then I'll get this basically a crop tool. I just want to, I want it to have some breathing room. I don't want it to be too tight. Okay, so if you notice, this is now in this layer. So I'm going to say template. And if I double click on this, it will give me this where I can put dim images to 50% is probably fine. I'm going to go a little more. I'm going to go 35. It's probably okay. And then I'm going to lock this. So right there, I can lock it. This will turn it on and off. And then I'm going to make a new layer and call it ink. Now, here's what you got to remember with this. We're going to add color to this. But we're not going to do what a lot of people think you do with Illustrator, where every shape has to be closed so you can fill it. That's not how we're going to paint it. All we're worried about right now is getting a really good ink drawing. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
So we don't
Yes.
have to worry about closing every shape or anything. So what we're going to do here, go to our pen tool. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes I can make a whole curve in one go. So I'm going to go here and then go here. And that's not too bad, okay? Then I'm going to hold Command or Control. If you see, it goes away, and I can click on the desktop, and that it'll let go. And I'm going to get up here closer. Looks like I need to pull this up a little bit. Because there's another curve here, then I got to do that in 2 passes. So what we're doing here is we're inking this. Does that make sense?
Yes, I see.
Now I can do it a couple ways. I can make this a little fatter line, which I think I'll do. I could go in here to the template, double click on the bar and go down to, let's go down to 25%. That's better. Or I could make this red, this line, but for some reason, I like to work in black, but I could do that. And here's the other thing you got to be careful of. You got to make sure that everything, you have to sort of anticipate certain things. So let's go here. I'm going to go to here. Now, be more accurate than I'm being. I'm being pretty sloppy right now. I'm going to pick this back up. I don't think I can do this whole curve in one, but I'll try. I'm going to do this. Let's do this. Now, here's another thing you can do. I don't want these two connected here. I just decided, right? This here. But if I go to my pen tool, if I try and do anything here, you can see it's trying to connect to that anchor point. You guys see that?
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
want it to connect to that anchor point. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to go up here to Object and go Lock Selection. So now when I go here, it's independent. Now I can come here. It's not going to try and grab that. I think I'm going to have to do this in 2 passes. And then, okay, so notice this now. I got this bulge going on here. So now I'm going to, okay, so here's the 2 things you got to remember. Either you want to manipulate this with your white arrow tool, but notice how it moves everything, okay? So when I'm in the pen tool, I can either hit Command or Control if you're on a Windows machine. And that will let me manipulate it like we just said, like that, okay? But I don't want that. Or I can use Option or Alt, and it will just manipulate one side of it. Does that make sense?
Yes. I had a question about when you went to object to
Lock
lock
it?
the select. Yeah. Is that just a shortcut version of locking it in the layers panel, or is it separate?
It's just, I always just use it as lock. It's usually Control or Command 2.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, that's how I've always done it. There might be
Nice.
stuff that you know that I don't know. I always learn things in here that you guys know that I don't know. Well, you mean when you go into the sub layers and do it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's basically be the same thing. I don't personally go into sub layers. That doesn't mean it's bad.
Right.
Some people like to do that where they drop it down and they go into all the individual stuff. It's not a bad way to work. It's just not the way I ever have.
I like the way that you just showed it. That seemed way easier than trying to find a single stroke in a layer.
Yeah, my problem with all that is, I mean, some people, that's the way they've done it, so they're just super good at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's like I had a boss one time who, actually when I was learning Photoshop and Illustrator and stuff like that, and he would go, hey, you should do that like this and like that. And I remember going, man, screw you. I'll do it the way I like to do it, Now that's okay, but really what he was trying to say is, hey, dude, your files are super sloppy and I have to deal with them. And they're kind of a mess the way you're building them, because I didn't know what I was doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I wasn't working smart. I was thrown into the deep end. That's how I learned Photoshop and Illustrator. So here's the other thing. When you want to unlock that object, you know, if you want to start manipulating it again, you just go right here to unlock all. And that will unlock it. Okay. Now, you got to start anticipating, you got to start, and this is part of the thing of this. So I'm going to lock this again. I'm going to go command 2. I don't know what it is on Windows. I have to go back and look. By the way, all your control, your hotkeys are right over here. Wait. My computer's thinking. No. All your hotkeys are to the right over there. You can see on Control X, C, all that stuff. So if you want to find the hotkey, that's where they are. So I'm going to go and relock these. I guess I already did. And I would go through this whole thing. So, you know, that one I got to do in 2 passes. So I got to go here, here, and then manipulate it. And I'm using my Option key right now. That's why it's only controlling one side of it. And now, let me hit return. Now I can go to my smooth tool and get rid of that kink right there. And what you got to do all the time is go here, your template, and turn it off every now and then and make sure your line work looks good. Okay. Now, places like this, or let's go, and here's the goal of this. We're going to try and improve this. I actually might have a file. I got to see if I can download it. I just remember that. So like here, so let's do this. Now, if I go back to my control and get my white arrow, I can click that and it'll let go. But like things like this now, you got to come in here. That looks funky. What we're trying to do is improve this drawing a little bit. See, that's funky. So let's go. Let's do that. Now I got a little tweak right there. Now, another thing that I do is when I realize these things aren't on point here, I'll pull them up so they die into each other. I don't want them. Object, unlock all. White arrow tool. I'll just make sure that they're, and I'll make sure at some point it's not overlapping because I'm going to manipulate all these lines. So this will probably not be a problem at some point. And we're going to go through. Let me see if I can find this real quick. You starting to get this thin and thick line going on?
Yes.
Now, how that's determined is that you have to determine your light source, which would probably pretty obviously be here, right here. Now, here's another thing, you guys. If you notice what that just did, like I go to my swatches and it's not there, which is, I find this really annoying that Illustrator does this. You can go to Window. You got to go past your swatches palette. You swatch libraries. And I usually just default to color books, or no, I'm sorry, default swatches, print. And then it gives me this. I don't know why it does that. It's super annoying. And now I'm going to put this up in my well. So I can just hit that when I need it. So this would be your light source. And the light's going this way. So if you see, once you put a light source here, these darker values, which are representing the shadow values, make sense, correct? So how I'm going to do that is that I go here, like I get all this inked. Now here's another thing. Like this line needs to overlap. You can see we kind of did, but not really. But this line looks better if it's overlapped. I would overlap this one probably too. Oops. And what I would do, once I got this all inked, then I would come in here, my light's up there. Now I would get my width tool. And probably come in here too. And start to manipulate all these lines. And wait till it's all inked. Like this one for sure will get fatter. This one. This might be a little too much right now, so I'll pull it back down. Oops, too much. Oops. Here, I got to find that anchor. There it is. It's too fat. And then this one, I would probably pull down to a nice sharp point also. That's too much. This is getting hit with the light, so this can be a little thinner. That's fine. When you're doing things like this, you know, you want to just overlap them. Again, I turn this off. Yeah, could be better, but it's okay.
Do you ever add any anchor points to your line to adjust the width exactly where you want it?
I don't usually have to, but yes, it's like, look at this right here, this bad kink right here, this person put in there. Yeah, so that's a good, I'm glad you asked that. I don't tend to do it that much. I mean, that doesn't mean anything other than I just don't tend to do it that much. Now, look, there's a lot of kinks in this, but just because you brought it up, let's talk about it. You know, let me get rid of these kinks. Yeah, that's good. This one's got a little bit of a kink. I'm trying to make the drawing better. That's what partly why I picked this drawing is it's a fairly balanced drawing, but it's just not really kicked into high gear. Okay. Yeah, if I wanted to add an anchor point, I would go here, click, and make sure you don't go over here. By the way, that's the curvature tool. You don't want that. And by the way, when I hit my option and it only works on one side of the line, that's this anchor point corner tool. Okay. Just we don't want to keep going up here to do that. So when I'm in the pin tool, I can just hit option and it'll switch to that anchor point tool. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's all we're doing with that. Now, if I want to add an anchor point, I would just come in here and add it. If I want to delete one, I would come in here to my delete tool and delete it. Okay, but yeah, sometimes you do need to add an anchor point to get it smoothed out or have enough control.
You said to hold an option key when you're doing the pen tool, when you're doing.
It depends on what you're doing. If I want to manipulate something, you have two options when I'm in the pin tool. So I'm gonna go back to my pin tool. I can hold command or control, and I will get that. And then if I go, so now I'm in the pin tool, but I'm holding the command key or control key, and it will manipulate. That line is weird. All my stuff now is acting like I'm on the other. That's weird. They're all reacting to that. Okay, hang on. If I go, I want to manipulate this, it manipulates the whole thing, correct?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's when I'm holding in my pin tool, when I'm holding the command, that's what I get. If I don't want to do this part or this part, then I hold option and I see I get that little corner tool.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And then I do that. Now I can just do
okay.
Okay. So one will let you manipulate sort of both together is just a standard Bezier curve, or one will let you use one side. Okay. And those tools, just because I always want you to know where the tools are. What we're talking about here is we're talking about this right here, this little corner tool. That's the option one.
Okay, got you.
Okay. So we don't want to keep going up to that. I mean, that wouldn't be effective. We want to just, right? and I'm going to put up a folder that a Google folder, and you can drop your thing in. But what you're going to give me is, you're not going to give me the AI file. You're going to go export as, name it, JPEG. And then when you say use artboards, let me go over this real quick too. When you're working, a lot of times you'll have a lot of crap over here. This stuff that you've been, it might be assets and things like that you're using. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like I might have bits and pieces and things, I end up with all kinds of stuff in here. So what happens is when I do what I just said and I go export as, and let's name it. So let's go JPEG. What it's going to do, I didn't hit use artboards, right? So I did that. Okay, and then you get this. You want CMYK or do you want RGB? You want RGB. RGB is for screens. CMYK is for print. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yes.
The
So
reason
it's-
CMYK is for print is when you print anything you've ever seen in your life, basically, it's been printed 4-color process offset lithography mostly, okay? Which means there's a cyan plate, a magenta plate, a yellow plate, and a black plate, and that combines to make every color you know of, okay? But for what we're doing, we want to just do RGB, and then for what we're doing, we could probably just do 72. For print, it would be 300, okay? And I want to go okay. Now, let's see where it went. Here it is. So see what it did? It included this stuff, right? Which we don't want. So when we export it, we have a lot of nonsense on here. We go export as JPEG, use artboards. And now this one, it didn't include all that other stuff. It just did the artboard.